Shakira and Hamilton caught together in Miami before the F1 Grand Prix. This is probably the first time you're hearing about this news, so I urge you to stay until the end before talking about it with your friends, because every detail matters. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. The penthouse door closed with a soft click, shutting out the world, the flashing cameras, the screaming fans, the relentless pulse of Miami nightlife. Inside, only a heavy electric silence remained, vibrating between them like a string stretched to breaking. Shakira stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, the glittering cityscape sprawling behind her like a submissive offering at her feet. The soft, golden light from a single lamp kissed her skin, making her glow like something otherworldly, something no mere mortal should dare touch. Louis leaned back against the door, his chest rising and falling with the slow, predatory control of a man who knew exactly how dangerous he was. His jacket hung open, revealing the hard lines of his body, the defined ridges of muscle carved into his torso. He let his eyes roam over her, no longer with the polite distance required by fame, but with the open, devouring hunger of a man who had waited long enough. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. Neither spoke. Words would have been clumsy, unnecessary. Shakira moved first, the motion languid, almost feline. She crossed the room in slow, deliberate steps, her hips swaying with that natural rhythm that had mesmerized millions. The worn denim clinging to her curves seemed to scream under the tension of her movements, and every subtle shift of her body was a symphony of seduction. Louis didn't move until she was close enough that he could feel her heat radiating toward him like the sun. He reached out, not grabbing, not demanding, just skimming his fingertips along her arm featherlight, tracing the curve of her shoulder down to her wrist. Her skin was impossibly soft, and he felt her shudder under his touch, a delicate tremor that betrayed just how deeply the tension had burrowed into her. When he finally pulled her closer, it wasn't rushed. It wasn't rough. It was devastatingly slow, a dance of power and surrender where neither was willing to give everything away just yet. His hand slid around her waist, finding the knot at the hem of her tank top, tugging it loose with a single precise motion. The fabric fell away, exposing a sliver of taut golden skin, and he lowered his head, pressing his lips just below her navel, tasting the salt and sweetness of her. Shakira arched into him, a soft gasp escaping her lips, a sound so raw, so beautifully unguarded, it sliced through the heavy air like lightning. She tangled her fingers in his hair, tugging just enough to make him growl low in his throat. That growl, deep and primal, vibrated against her skin, pulling a whimper from her lips that she didn't even try to suppress. Louis rose slowly, tracing a line of kisses up her body, up the valley of her ribs, the hollow between her breasts, along the delicate line of her collarbone. His hands mapped her like a man memorizing sacred scripture, exploring the planes and curves of her body with a reverence that made her knees weaken. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. When their mouths finally met, it was a collision, no gentle teasing, no soft prelude. It was messy, wild, a kiss that bruised and healed at once. Her hands fisted in the open edges of his shirt, tugging him against her with a desperation that mirrored the frantic pounding of both their hearts. His tongue swept into her mouth, claiming, teasing, tasting, making promises he fully intended to keep before the night was over. Clothing became an inconvenience. Pieces fell away between heated kisses and frantic touches, until bare skin met bare skin, until there was nothing left between them but unfiltered, uncontainable desire. Shakira's nails raked down Louis's back, leaving red trails in her wake, while he gripped her thighs, lifting her effortlessly against him, her legs wrapping around his waist with a natural, desperate ease. He carried her across the room without breaking the kiss, setting her down atop the cool marble counter of the penthouse kitchen. The contrast of the chilled surface against her heated skin made her gasp again, and he swallowed the sound hungrily, anchoring her to the moment. His hands traced slow, maddening patterns along her thighs, teasing higher and higher, until she was writhing, begging with breathy moans and urgent shifts of her hips. And then he paused, pulling back just enough to look at her. God, the sight of her, flushed, wild, needy, was almost enough to undo him completely. "You're dangerous," he murmured, his voice rough and dark, the words brushing against her skin like a caress. "And you're late," she whispered back, her voice a throaty, wicked thing that wrapped around him and refused to let go. That was all the permission he needed. The rest of the night blurred into a fever dream of heat, skin, and the sweet savage rhythm of two people utterly consumed by each other. There was no finesse anymore, no holding back. It was a raw, feral thing, the kind of intimacy that left fingerprints on souls, not just skin. Shakira's voice, that voice that had moved millions, now cried out in broken, desperate moans that only he would ever hear. Lewis's control, usually so perfect on the track, shattered completely under her touch, under her body moving against his in rhythms more ancient and powerful than anything man-made. They explored every inch of each other again and again, until the lines between them blurred, until there was no Shakira, no Lewis. Only fire, only need, only the savage, holy collision of two stars destined to burn brighter together than they ever could alone. When the first light of dawn began to seep through the windows, painting the city in soft shades of pink and gold, they lay tangled together on the cool expanse of the massive bed, bodies spent but hearts still racing. Neither spoke. There were no words big enough for what they had created between them. Something explosive, something that felt less like a night and more like a beginning. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. Lewis brushed a strand of caramel hair from her face, his thumb lingering against her cheekbone with a tenderness that made her heart ache. Shakira smiled sleepily, a smile so beautiful, so devastating, it felt like the sunrise had broken inside the room. Whatever happened next, whatever the world outside would say, whatever rumors would spin from the scraps left behind, they both knew one thing with absolute certainty. They had touched something real, something forbidden, something absolutely unforgettable. And they weren't nearly finished yet. Lewis had made an art form of disappearing in plain sight. That night, he wasn't just avoiding attention, he was bending it, warping it, turning it into a weapon of seduction. Draped in an oversized black hoodie, sunglasses glued to his face even indoors where the artificial light barely flickered, he became a shadow, a living, breathing contradiction. Famous beyond comprehension, yet so skilled at cloaking himself in mystery that it was almost as if the mere act of observing him became intimate, intrusive, like stripping him naked with your gaze. He moved into the luxury skybox without ceremony, without entourage, the crowd parting unconsciously, sensing something primal in the air. Even reduced in stature by his slouched posture, Lewis radiated dominance, the kind that didn't need to be announced. It was felt. It was inhaled. High above the arena, encased in glass and seclusion, he watched. Not the game, not the crowd, but her. Always her. Shakira was impossible to ignore. The way she sat, the curve of her lips as she laughed at something only half heard, the tilt of her head when her eyes, those molten, knowing eyes, swept the space and lingered, hesitated, looking upwards as if pulled by a magnetic force she couldn't name, or maybe refused to admit. Every few minutes, her posture would shift, almost imperceptibly, like an itch under her skin she couldn't quite reach. She smiled more than once, but not at the people beside her. No, her real smiles were thrown like secret offerings toward that dark glass fortress where she could feel him burning holes through her defenses. From where he sat, Lewis could see it all. The way her bare shoulders gleamed under the soft light. The delicate dip of her collarbone exposed by a silk camisole that clung to her like a second skin. The reckless cascade of curls she pushed back behind her ear in a motion so sensual it could have stopped a clock. And he didn't just watch, he absorbed her, catalogued every teasing glance, every unconscious sway of her hips as she adjusted in her seat, every time her tongue darted out to wet lips that had no business looking that inviting. The game became noise. Background. A pathetic sideshow to the real spectacle unfolding between them. Invisible, electric, undeniable. When the final buzzer blared and the arena erupted in a thunder of cheers, Lewis didn't flinch. His sunglasses hid the way his pupils dilated, the way adrenaline flushed through his veins, igniting something reckless and inevitable inside him. He stood slowly, fluidly, his every movement dripping with intention, and slipped away before the masses even realized the game had ended. Outside, our trusted paparazzo didn't chase the screaming fans or the gaudy VIPs desperate for flashes and clicks. No. He knew better. He positioned himself at the one place that mattered, the private exit, the gateway to truth. He saw Shakira first, radiant and untouched by the chaos, her son cradled gently against her side. She laughed genuinely, ruffling his hair, whispering Spanish lullabies as they approached a black SUV gleaming under the muted light. She bundled the boy into the vehicle, kissing his forehead, tracing her fingers down his cheek in a caress so tender it ached to witness. The driver pulled away, and the SUV glided like a shark through Miami's humid night, devouring the distance to her mansion, a glass temple hidden within lush, overgrown tropical gardens. At the entrance, staff materialized like loyal phantoms, ushering the sleepy child into the house. Shakira lingered by the SUV, murmuring something low to the driver. He nodded, and with the smooth professional discretion only money could buy, he disappeared, leaving her there alone, half in, half out of the idling vehicle. The night was heavy, thick, pregnant with tension. Shakira stayed seated in the SUV's back seat, one heel propped lazily on the console, the other foot tapping against the floor with a nervous, restless rhythm. Her phone remained untouched. Her hands fidgeted once, twice, then stilled, fingers curling around the edge of her seat. Minutes dragged out, bloated with expectation. And then he came. A dark figure, emerging from the shadows beyond the gates, walking with the predatory smoothness of a panther. Every step was deliberate, every movement taut with control, with heat barely held in check. The hoodie was still up, the face still partially hidden, but it didn't matter. Shakira knew. She didn't need to see to recognize him. She felt him. The SUV door opened with a whisper of sound. Shakira didn't look at him, didn't flinch. She simply shifted, making room, inviting him in. Louis slid inside with the lethal grace of a man who had no doubts, no hesitations. The door clicked shut, sealing them into their own private universe. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was a living, breathing thing, thick with all the things they hadn't dared say in public. Louis reached up slowly, deliberately, pulling the hood down, removing his sunglasses. His eyes, when they met hers, were dark, hungry, searing. Shakira's breath caught, an involuntary feminine gasp that seemed to detonate between them. There was no slow build, no cautious dance. He reached for her, and she met him halfway, her hands fisting the front of his hoodie, yanking him toward her. Their mouths collided in a kiss that was feral, bruising, starved. Teeth clashed. Tongues tangled in a war for dominance neither wanted to win. Louis's hands roamed her body with the desperate reverence of a man who had waited too damn long. He cupped her face, her neck, slid down to her waist, pulling her across the seat into his lap, swallowing the moan that escaped her lips. Shakira responded with equal ferocity, straddling him without care for decorum, without care for anything except the maddening need clawing at her from the inside out. Her hands found the hem of his hoodie, shoving it upward, revealing hard, coiled muscle that flexed under her fingertips. She scraped her nails lightly down his stomach, eliciting a low guttural sound from Louis's throat that made her hips jerk involuntarily. The space was cramped, suffocating, windows fogging up almost immediately with the sheer heat pouring off them. The scent of him, clean sweat, expensive cologne, adrenaline, wrapped around her, dizzying, intoxicating. She was drowning in him, and she never wanted to come up for air. Louis shifted, his hands sliding under her camisole, fingers spreading across bare, heated skin. Shakira gasped, arching into him, her head falling back in surrender. His mouth left hers only to trail down her throat, biting, sucking, marking a path of possession as he went. Outside, the mansion's lights glowed innocently, but inside that blacked-out SUV, innocence had been abandoned completely. Shakira pressed closer, grinding down against him shamelessly, her hands threading into his hair, pulling, urging him closer, deeper. Louis responded with a savage groan, bucking upward, his restraint crumbling. He pressed her back against the seat, pinning her with his body, his weight, his hunger, as his mouth reclaimed hers with punishing intensity. Time lost all meaning. There were only moans and sighs and the frantic primal language of hands on bodies, mouths on skin, the wet slide of desperate kisses, the low, broken sounds escaping into the humid night. They didn't talk. Words were useless now. Only touch mattered. Only the frantic meeting of two lives burning too brightly to stay apart for long. And when at last the SUV's engine rumbled back to life, when it rolled silently into the velvet darkness, it wasn't just a car disappearing down a tree-lined street. It was two worlds colliding. It was a secret forged in heat and hunger, too raw, too real, too explosive to ever be contained. He slid into the back seat beside her, and in that small charged space between their bodies, the air grew thick, almost heavy, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Even in the low, muted light diffused through the tinted windows, every contour of him was unmistakable, the hard, defined cut of his jawline, the subtle flecks of muscle beneath his shirt, the unmistakable aura of a man used to owning every room he walked into. Lewis Hamilton, champion of speed, icon of cool control, was suddenly so close, so real, so dangerously present. Shakira didn't look at him immediately, she didn't have to. His energy engulfed her, a magnetic force that wrapped around her like an invisible net. Outside, The world blurred into neon streaks and palm-fringed shadows as the SUV slipped into the night, moving like a dark secret through Miami's fevered arteries. They said nothing at first, but their silence was louder than any words. Her hand rested casually on the leather seat, fingers splayed, trembling slightly from the tension sparking between them. His thigh brushed hers once, barely an accident, just a ghost of contact, but it was enough to make her breath catch in her throat. The SUV moved through the city, past velvet-roped nightclubs where music throbbed like a second heartbeat, past waterfront mansions hidden behind hedges manicured to perfection, past lovers stumbling out into the humid air with flushed cheeks and messy hair. But they weren't stopping there. Not tonight. Trailing them, the paparazzo's blood pounded against his temples as he fought to keep up without giving himself away. He knew instinctively that tonight was different. Tonight wasn't about public smiles or staged photo ops. Tonight smelled of danger, of recklessness, of skin brushing skin in dark corners. It was the scent of a story that could shatter illusions and ignite 1,000 headlines. Ahead, the Valhalla Grand Miami rose like a forbidden temple, shimmering under the moonlight. A place where billionaires whispered deals over cognac aged longer than most marriages. A place where rules melted like ice against hot skin. The SUV disappeared into a private secured entrance, swallowed into the depths of exclusivity. No flashing cameras. No unwanted witnesses. Except for one. The paparazzo, fueled by the kind of desperation only the scent of scandal can create, made his move. A fake name, a pocket full of cash slipped under the right hand, and suddenly he was inside, a shadow among silk and marble. He found them again not long after, luck, skill, and sheer animal instinct leading him to Ambrosia, the hotel's hidden restaurant, a place so secret it didn't appear on any map or brochure. It wasn't merely a restaurant, it was a sanctuary of sin, designed for whispered deals, forbidden glances, and the kind of meetings where discretion wasn't just expected, it was bought. Seated in a shadowed booth, Shakira and Lewis looked like a tableau out of a forbidden dream. The candlelight flickered between them, painting her skin gold and his in shades of molten bronze. She wore a black silk dress that clung to her like a second skin, the fabric slipping over her curves with every breath she took. Lewis, in a perfectly tailored dark jacket, looked devastating, calm on the surface, but with a smoldering tension vibrating under his skin. Their conversation was low, private, but it wasn't the words that mattered. It was the language of bodies, the unspoken dialogue conducted in glances, in the slow lean forward that reduced the space between them to something intimate, almost unbearable. His hand moved toward his glass but lingered, brushing her fingers in a touch so light, so deliberate, it seemed sacrilegious. She didn't pull away. She smiled, a slow, secret smile that promised trouble, and traced the rim of her glass with a fingertip. Her nails painted the same deep red as a whispered sin. Minutes stretched. The world outside the booth ceased to exist. The energy around them thickened, heavy as a thunderstorm about to break. Every stolen glance, every accidental brush of skin, every breathless moment vibrating with promises unspoken and desires unchecked. And then, without any ceremony, she rose. She moved around the table with the graceful danger of a panther, her dress whispering against her legs, the candlelight catching in her hair like a halo made of fire and temptation. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She simply looked at him, one brow arched in invitation, and walked away, toward a private corridor at the back of the restaurant. For a moment, Lewis remained seated, as if weighing the consequences of what following her would mean. And then he moved. He followed her without a word, his body a blade honed by decision, every step betraying his need, his want, his utter abandonment of everything else but the woman who had just summoned him without so much as a touch. The paparazzo, breathless and half-mad with adrenaline, abandoned caution and followed at a distance. Down a hushed corridor lined with exotic plants and heavy drapes, she led him. Past closed doors and murmured laughter. Past hidden alcoves and mirrored walls. To a private elevator guarded by a man who barely blinked before letting them pass. Such was the power of their names. The doors slid closed. Alone at last. The air inside the elevator was stifling, electric, saturated with everything they hadn't yet dared to say. For a heartbeat, they stood apart. Then the distance crumbled. Lewis reached for her, his hand tangling in her hair as he pulled her closer, and she met him halfway, their mouths colliding in a kiss that was not gentle, not exploratory. It was desperate, devouring, a raw clash of hunger and need. Her hand slid over his chest, feeling the heat of him through the thin fabric, fingers digging in as if to anchor herself against the tide of sensation crashing through her. He pressed her against the mirrored wall, the cool glass a sharp contrast to the fire blazing between them. His lips found the curve of her neck, tracing a path down to the hollow of her throat where her pulse thundered under his tongue. She gasped, her body arching toward him, surrendering without a second thought, without a single shred of hesitation. The elevator shuddered to a stop. They barely made it to the room, her back against the door as he kissed her again, harder, with a hunger that spoke of months, years, of holding back, of playing a game that now lay in ruins at their feet. He fumbled with the keycard, cursing under his breath, and then they stumbled inside, the heavy door swinging shut behind them, sealing them away from the rest of the world. In the sanctuary of the penthouse, nothing mattered anymore. Not who they were. Not what they risked. Only the heat of skin against skin, the desperate tug of clothing being stripped away, the whispered names gasping into the darkness. Tonight, they were not stars. Not legends. Not icons. Tonight, they were simply human, burning alive in each other's arms. The door clicked shut behind them with a soft finality, but it might as well have been a gunshot for the way it electrified the air. They were no longer bound by the thin pretense of public civility. In the privacy of Shakira's suite, the tension that had coiled and tightened between them all evening finally snapped loose, wild and unstoppable. The soft glow of the room, golden light spilling across plush furniture and heavy drapes, barely registered as Shakira backed Louis against the door, her body pressing flush to his, their breaths ragged, mingling in the charged space between their mouths. Louis's hands found her waist, strong fingers spanning the delicate curve of her hips, pulling her tighter against him with a groan that rumbled low in his chest. Shakira tilted her face up, her dark eyes smoldering with a heat that dared him to lose control. And he did. Their mouths met with a hunger that was all teeth and tongues, lips sliding, catching, tasting. She moaned into him, the sound vibrating against his tongue, driving him absolutely mad. Without breaking the kiss, Shakira reached up, threading her fingers through his tight curls, tugging just hard enough to make him gasp against her mouth. He retaliated with a hand sliding lower, gripping a handful of her backside, squeezing in a way that made her arch into him, shameless and wanting. The chemistry between them wasn't just physical, it was combustible, primal, a meeting of two forces too powerful to be contained by mere social boundaries. Louis scooped her up effortlessly, Shakira wrapping her legs around his waist with a laugh that turned into a breathless sigh as he carried her deeper into the room. She could feel him, hard ready, pressed against her, separated by maddening layers of clothing that suddenly felt unbearable. His mouth never left her skin, tracing a hot, urgent path along her jawline, down her neck, sucking gently at the sensitive spot just below her ear, making her whimper, her nails digging into his shoulders through his shirt. He set her down atop the massive bed, the mattress dipping under their weight, but even then, he didn't give her a moment's reprieve. Louis knelt before her, sliding his hand slowly, so achingly slowly, up her thighs, pushing her dress higher and higher, revealing smooth, bronzed skin that gleamed under the soft lamplight. His thumbs traced maddening circles along the insides of her thighs, so close to where she burned for him, but never quite touching, teasing her with a patience that was both infuriating and insanely arousing. Shakira, never one to surrender control so easily, reached for him, grabbing the hem of his shirt and tugging insistently. Louis smirked against her skin but complied, pulling the fabric over his head in one swift motion, revealing a body carved from muscle and discipline, every inch of him gleaming like sculpted bronze. Her hands explored him hungrily, nails raking lightly over his chest, tracing the hard lines of his abdomen, savoring the way his muscles jumped under her touch. In retaliation, he bent low, sliding the straps of her dress off her shoulders with agonizing slowness, bearing her inch by inch, like a man unwrapping the most precious, most forbidden gift. His mouth followed the path of the dress as it slipped lower, pressing kisses to every newly exposed patch of skin, over the elegant curve of her collarbone, down the graceful line of her sternum, pausing reverently at the swell of her breasts, breathing her in like she was the only thing keeping him alive. When he finally peeled the dress from her body, Shakira sat before him in delicate lace, her breathing shallow, her skin flushed with desire. Louis knelt back for a moment, simply drinking in the sight of her, so beautiful it almost hurt to look at her, so powerful in her vulnerability it made his heart ache with want. She smiled then, slow and wicked, and reached for him again, pulling him down atop her, wrapping her legs around his hips with a sinuous, feline grace. Their bodies pressed together, skin against skin, the heat between them an inferno that demanded satisfaction. Their kisses deepened, slowed, grew heavy with meaning, with the sheer weight of everything they had wanted to say with words, but chose instead to express with touch. Shakira arched into him, her fingers splaying across his back, her nails scoring light, delicious lines into his skin as he moved against her, each grinding thrust of his hips against hers drawing a fresh gasp from her lips. Louis buried his face in her neck, murmuring words against her skin, words in English, in Spanish, in the universal language of desperate, burning need. She answered in kind, her own voice husky, broken, pleading in a way that made him nearly lose the last threads of his self-control. Hands explored, mouths found every hidden, secret spot that made the other cry out, bodies moving together in a rhythm older than time, a private symphony composed of gasps and moans and the urgent rustle of tangled sheets. When they finally came together, it was with a force that left them both trembling, clinging to each other as wave after wave of pleasure crashed through them. Shakira's name tore from Louis's throat in a low guttural sound that spoke of awe and worship, and Shakira, in turn, cried out his name, her voice raw, unguarded, stripped bare of anything but truth. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the wreckage of their shared storm, bodies slick with sweat, hearts pounding in sync, the faint glow of the city lights painting their skin in gold and silver. Louis traced slow, lazy circles along Shakira's spine with the tips of his fingers, and she smiled against his chest, sated, but already hungry for more. She tilted her head up, her eyes glittering with mischief and promise, and murmured against his skin that the night was far from over. And Louis, still catching his breath, grinned down at her, knowing with absolute certainty that whatever fires they had started tonight, they had only just begun to burn. They stood up from their table in one fluid, unspoken agreement, chairs sliding back with the faintest scrape against the polished marble floor. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The tension between them was a living thing, humming in the thick, scented air of the private dining room, sparking every time their bodies drew close enough to brush. Without a backward glance, they disappeared into the corridor, their steps slow but loaded, vibrating with a heavy knowledge of what was about to unfold. Every movement was a declaration, a silent promise written in the flex of his jaw, the sway of her hips, the way their hands brushed but didn't yet dare to tangle. Our photographer, burning with curiosity and adrenaline, followed at a cautious distance, ducking behind columns and decorative plants, heart hammering against his ribs. There were no handlers to stop him, no bodyguards throwing him dark looks. Just the two of them, completely absorbed in each other, oblivious to the world. They moved like predators, like conspirators, like two people who had been waiting far too long for this precise moment to ignite. They reached the elevators, and without hesitation, Louis's hand skimmed lightly over the small of her back, guiding Shakira inside. Her body leaned instinctively into his touch, the briefest contact but one that made the photographer clench his fists in anticipation. The mirrored doors closed with a whisper, and for a heartbeat, he caught a glimpse, her smile slow and wicked, his eyes burning into hers with the intensity of a man drowning in restraint. The chase wasn't over. Driven by an irresistible pull, the photographer raced up the grand staircase, 2 steps at a time, following the faintest echoes of their passage. His breath was ragged by the time he reached the right floor, creeping down the thickly carpeted hallway just in time to catch sight of Louis unlocking a door, pulling Shakira in with a force just shy of desperation. The door swung closed with a muted thud that seemed to seal the night's destiny. He pressed his ear gently to the door, careful, desperate, his entire body taut with the need to hear, to know. For a few long seconds, there was nothing but the mechanical hum of the hallway lights. Then the sound of a champagne cork popping broke the silence, followed by Shakira's soft laugh, low, rich, curling around the photographer's spine like smoke. The murmur of voices blended into each other, indistinct but thick with heat. Then, slowly, deliciously, the tone shifted. A gasp broke free, delicate and sharp, sliced through the air. The photographer stiffened. Another soft noise, this time a muffled moan, followed by the soft pat-pat of hurried footsteps across the plush carpet. A sharp metallic clink suggested a belt being undone, a zipper dragged down with trembling urgency. And then the real symphony began. A groan, low and feral, rumbled from Louis's throat, matched by the sharp intake of breath from Shakira as their bodies finally collided. The slap of bare skin echoed faintly through the heavy door, accompanied by the sound of frantic hands skimming over flushed, exposed flesh. Furniture scraped across the floor, careless and violent, as they stumbled their way deeper into the suite, tangled in each other's arms. Shakira's laughter dissolved into a breathless whimper, the sound of a woman pushed to the brink of sanity. Louis's voice, deep and rough, came in guttural bursts, grunts, curses, half-formed sentences that dissolved into gasps as she bit, sucked, clawed at him with the wild abandon of a woman starved for touch. The photographer could hear everything. The way her nails raked down his back, the sharp slap of her hand against his skin, the wet, obscene sounds of mouths colliding, tongues tangling, teeth grazing sensitive skin. The air grew thick, heavy, electric, charged with every broken moan, every shuddering gasp. The bed frame groaned violently under the assault of their bodies, the headboard knocking rhythmically against the wall in a frantic, primal tempo. Their cries grew louder, rawer, less human, more animal, until the photographer could almost feel the heat radiating from the other side of the door. He heard Shakira's voice, a high, keening whimper that bled into a guttural cry as she fell apart under Louis's hands, his mouth, his relentless rhythm. Louis answered her with a low, shuddering growl, the sound of a man so far gone in pleasure, he barely remembered his own name. Every sound was soaked in desperate need, the wet, frantic sounds of bodies moving together, the slap of hips meeting hips with merciless speed, the staccato beat of breathless gasps that broke through the air in rapid, uneven bursts. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't slow. It was brutal, hungry, a claiming, a taking, a giving. It was teeth sinking into tender skin, hands gripping so hard that bruises would bloom like forbidden flowers come morning. Minutes bled into one another, stretching endlessly, suspended in a haze of sweat, heat, and unrelenting desire. They didn't slow. They didn't stop. Every time a cry peaked, every time the bed frame groaned under the force of their need, they found a new rhythm, a new position, a new way to chase the high that neither wanted to end. Shakira's voice became a litany of broken Spanish, curses and prayers tangled into one as Louis drove her higher, harder, mercilessly, until she shattered in his arms, sobbing his name like a confession. Louis wasn't far behind, a tortured animalistic roar tearing from his chest as he buried himself in her, hands clutching her hips with bruising force. The final crescendo was breathtaking, a chaotic blend of cries, gasps, the furious creaking of the mattress, the desperate, mindless grasping for something, anything to hold on to. When it ended, it did so not with a whimper but with a crash, like two stars colliding, the aftershocks vibrating through the heavy walls of the suite. Silence fell, thick and absolute, save for the soft, ragged breathing of two people utterly wrecked by pleasure by each other. Shakira's soft whimper broke the quiet first, a tiny sound of contentment and exhaustion. Louis answered with a rough, rumbling laugh, wrapping his arms tighter around her, their bodies still tangled, unwilling to let go. The photographer, still pressed to the door, almost slid to the floor, overwhelmed by the raw, feral intimacy he had just witnessed. His mind reeled with the knowledge that this wasn't just a hookup. It wasn't something either of them could walk away from cleanly. This was wildfire. This was a bomb waiting to detonate. And when it did, it wouldn't just scorch them, it would ignite a scandal that would burn through the entertainment world like a blade through silk. Because what had happened behind that door wasn't just sex. It was a revolution. And the world had no idea what was coming.